All right, so let's go ahead and get started with the class. Since half the class is not quite here yet, I will do something a little bit kind of related to the class, but not so related. So let's go to the Power Server and just take a quick look at the WordPress. Well, this one is kind of interesting. It is related to this class for once. Somebody wrote this article about alternative desktop operating systems, and we kind of know that Linux has always been kind of on the horizon, but most people think I don't really want to use Linux the way the clunky GUI looks like. Like XFCE4 is the Windows manager that I use. It's functional, but it definitely doesn't have the splash or the friendliness of modern operating systems. It works for me, but for most people, it's kind of primitive. Okay, but there are two entries that are kind of gaining steam or gaining momentum as we speak. One is Chrome OS. So if you look, if you read this article, you will see more details about it. Okay. One is Chrome OS, which is not really surprising because Chrome OS is pushed by Google on their Chromebooks as an alternative operating system. It is Linux-based. It's very lightweight. It only exists to support Chrome, Google Chrome as a browser. So it doesn't need a whole lot of other stuff. As a result, it boots really fast, and it's lightweight, easy to maintain because it doesn't come with a whole bunch of stuff like LibreOffice. Typically does not come with Chrome OS, even though it probably can be installed. The second one, which is also coming from Google, is interesting because it comes from an entirely different direction. Because when most people think about Android, what do they think about? They think about something like this, right? I mean, that's a typical, device that runs Android. Or something slightly larger, maybe a 7-inch tablet or maybe a 10-inch tablet. But Android the desktop version of Android is actually making some headways into becoming a desktop operating system, which I think is really surprising. Because considering Windows tried to go in the opposite direction, it started off as a desktop operating system, and it's having a really hard time getting into the mobile market. Because the tile thing doesn't really quite work out when they try to merge, mouse-controlled interface with touch control interface. It didn't really quite work out. But Android, on the other hand, works out kind of okay. I have some reservations about Android as a desktop operating system for myself, okay? Because I like to open up like 20 gazillion windows all at the same time and be able to kind of tap through everything because I do a lot of development. But for casual browsing or for casual use of the operating system, it's not bad, okay? I have a ASUS transformer that has a keyboard dock, so it comes with a touchpad. And I can use the touchpad, and when I use the touchpad, a little arrow appears on the screen, just like with a normal desktop, operating system. And I can click things, just like touching things. And for the most part, whatever I can do with touch, I can use that little pointer to do it too. So coming from the direction of touch-based and then going back to mouse-based doesn't seem to be as much of a problem of the other direction. But the one thing that I think is really cool about having Android as a desktop operating system is the apps that you write for Android will automatically run as well. Okay, so what you learn in this class to write Android apps for smaller mobile devices will also work on a desktop running Android. And it's not just in theory. There are people running Android as a desktop operating system as we speak. They have ported it to the desktop already. It doesn't come with any particular machine, but I think that has to do with Microsoft having a really iron grip on manufacturers, so they cannot include anything other than Windows on the newer machines. But it's interesting. I think this one is coming, and it's good for this class because now that you're learning how to write Android applications, it wouldn't be too much of a stretch to make those applications run natively and look right on a desktop environment. So are there any questions in the comments about this particular news item? Having Android running as a desktop operating system and not just for mobile devices. Go ahead.
I know there were talks about merging Chrome OS with Android.
That probably will be done, because they both have the parent company being Google. Chromebook is very specialized. Chromebook is really just a lightweight netbook, and intended only to run Chrome as a browser. It has some other things too, like you can run Netflix on the Chromebook, because it has DRM already installed and stuff like that. So it does deviate from a normal Linux distribution a little bit. But Android is more than just that. I mean, Android has an entire framework. And the other cool part about Android is, you have a really big market already with Android apps, whereas, Chrome does not nearly have that type of presence when it comes to apps. These two will kind of interact. I think they will merge, but it's not really just Android taking over, because Chrome does have something to offer as well.
What do you know about programming for Chrome? Is it essentially
it's not Android type. It's JavaScript on the client side, but you also have to specify what you want to run on the other side.
Okay.
It's a different kind of model. It's a cloud-based model from the get-go. Whereas Android programming is definitely more focused on the client side. You might have apps that has a backend that has to talk to the cloud, but it is not a required feature. It is optional, and many apps do not talk to the cloud. Whereas with Chrome apps, that's basically the assumption. You start with a cloud application, and then you use JavaScript on the local side to improve your user interface.
So if you want to develop something that could run on both Chrome and Android, is it that you use the WebKit?
Yeah, if you just make it WebKit based, then it's going to be okay, because it's just a web application. But if you do it that way, you lose the ability to run it without connection to the internet. So it depends on what you want to do, because for certain types of application, maybe it's okay not to have to rely on the network. Like a Compass, app, you might want to connect to the cloud if you want to use augmented reality and know, okay, I'm looking in this direction. There's a restaurant like 2 miles down the street, okay. But if you just want to run it as a regular Compass, you don't need the connectivity to the network. So making that a Chrome app may not be the best way to do it. And then the other thing about Chrome app is, because it's running from a browser, so accessing your local devices may not be as easy as an Android app, because the Android framework makes it easy to access all the devices on your mobile device already. So there are pluses and minuses, but they're both Linux-based. That really is the kind of interesting part, is they're both Linux-based, and yet it goes in a different direction, and now they're kind of merging back together again. So that's one. The next one is, I guess some people here may play games from Valve. This is interesting because your DNS cache is being read by certain games distributed by Valve. What they want to do is to see if a player has been using cheat engines or specific cheat engines, and if they do, Valve would ban them, so that they cannot use their server anymore. Yep.
That's a poor way of doing it, because someone who doesn't like someone else could have them visit a web page that has an integrated frame that also contains that website that they're looking for.
It can be, but they're looking for specific domain names that humans usually do not go, because the cheat engines will go to specific places to get their updates. So, you can have a link, but if it doesn't load, then it still does not count. So it has to be, you have to be visiting, a certain, URL or domain name, in order for the DNS cache to have that entry. They claim that they have, kicked out like 500 plus people up to this point because they were using cheats. And of course, there's the DARPA thing. They're now finally realizing the importance of security, network and computer security. And DARPA has a program to train up to 4,000 security experts by year 2017. And this is a fairly small number. If you think about 4,000 versus the rest of the world, it's not a big number. Because security threats are not coming from just hackers or commercial hackers. They can be state sponsored by certain countries, and 4,000 people is definitely just a starting point as far as this program is concerned. So that's kind of good, cool stuff to know, because now well, if you don't want to do Android app application, computer security is definitely a field that you can consider, because there will be lots of opportunities over there as well. All right, so with this stuff done, and I have waited another 7 minutes or so, it's time to get into the last material.
Did you start recording?
So, yep,
Okay.
has been recording from the start. But thank you for checking. All right. So we are still on the topic of user interface programming. And I cannot remember when I set the due date. Does anyone remember when I was supposed to set the due date to? Was it today or?
Supposed to be today.
Supposed to be today?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go ahead and reopen it so you guys can turn it in. So that's a tale of two, simple user interface. Yes. I'm gonna change the date so that, yep, there are 10 attempts. I'm gonna let you guys do it. Turn it in at the end of today, because I probably forgot to change that.
Are you talking about the homework called Simple Interface?
Yeah,
Okay.
yep. That's the only one that's active at this point, so we're gonna change it to
A tale of two activities.
Sorry?
A tale of two activities is the one that's currently.
That is not, that's not released yet. I'm still working on that one.
Just did that and submitted. Sure.
Uh-oh.
I remember because it was the name of it.
Tell us about.
Or, let me check.
That one, I just put it up like last night, and it's not finished yet.
I'll double check.
Okay. All right. So the other homework, simple user interface, is now active again, so you guys can continue with that one. I'm not sure whether it will let you continue, or you would have to basically restart the whole thing. Okay, you guys can give it a try, during the lab time today, and let me know. If it doesn't let you do it, I can delete your attempts, so you can basically do it all over again. The first few questions are pretty easy. It's really the coding part that is taking the time. All right. So tale of two activities is actually wrong, because it is, I uploaded the wrong file. It turns out to be just the same as the previous one. So what I'll do is I'm going to start with activity interactions today. This is basically notes that I typed up recently, as in an hour ago, that talks about how do you start an activity from another activity. We talked about this in cisp362 already using App Inventor, and some of you might remember that when we talked about that, there was a bug in App Inventor 2.0, and we could not get the result back from the other activity, right?
Yeah, they did fix it.
And then they fixed it later, right? Yeah, we kind of used some other way to kind of went around the problem. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll talk about how to do this today, but in Java, natively in the Android framework. Okay, so the first part is, what is an activity? Okay, because before we can talk about what is activity interaction, we need to first talk about what is exactly an activity. Now, if you click this link or this link here, one will bring you to the definition of the activity class in Android, whereas the other one, the overview, will bring you to the general description of what is an activity, not in the context of object-oriented programming in Android programming. So those two documents are fairly useful. The first one is kind of like a reference material, but the second one I think is really useful because it's a guide to use activities in Android. But if I want to summarize what an activity is in a single sentence, it basically is a screen of an application. That's essentially what it is. But it is a little bit more than that. If you read this document, the overview, it will say that an activity is a single focused thing that a user, the user, can do. Okay. Now in this case, I know that sometimes we look at user as just something or someone who is interacting with a particular application. In this case, it's almost 100% an actual end user, a person on the other side, and not a system on the other side. Okay. Another way to look at this is when a user interacts, when we talk about a user here, it is also referring to a human user. When a human interacts with an activity, he or she has an intention. In other words, with something to do, a particular objective to accomplish when an end user, a human end user interacts with an activity. So we kind of want to keep this in mind as we go through this, because later on we'll talk about what an intent is as a class, not a general word itself. So do we have any questions about this part here? What is an activity? No? Okay. So from the previous homework assignments, I think most of you already kind of get the feel of what an activity is, right? I mean, it's a screen. You can put components onto it. You can put buttons, text boxes, and whatnot into it. It takes up pretty much the entire screen so that a user can interact with your application. Okay. So what we'll do today is to look into how do you start another activity from an activity. In most cases, the Android system starts an activity. In other words, when you run and when you start an activity from the tray, that's how an activity is started. You click on the icon and the application starts. Or if you have the notification bar, it shows you have email. You click on one of those items and it starts the activity also, and say, okay, here we have 20 email messages from Gmail. But on the other hand, you can also have one application to start up an activity. Here's an example. If you want to if you have a button help in your own application, but you don't want to build in the help into the application because it takes up too much space and you'll be constantly updating the documentation anyway, then your help button may start up the web browser, WebKit, or another browser to show the documentation that is actually online. That makes sense, okay? Because you don't really want to store something on inside the application itself when it can be web-based and you can just look it up on the web. There are at least two ways to start another activity from your own activity. One call or one method is called start activity, and the other one is called start activity for results. As the names imply, one does not expect to get any results back. It's just saying, okay, go ahead and start this activity, and I don't even care when that one is done. Okay. The other one says start activity for results, which means I'm starting up this activity, but I am expecting something to come back from the requested activity. Okay, so that the other activity can come back with let's say a coordinate, can come back with a name, a contact. It can come back with any type of data, as we will see how to specify the results from the other activity, the one that is requested. Are there any questions at this point? No questions? Okay. There will be some code later on to show you exactly how you want to code your application. So let's take a look at the more complex one, which is the one that has expected results. This one takes two parameters. If you look up the documentation of this one, so this is a good time to go to this page here and take a look at the activity class definition. And then I'll just go ahead and search for start activity for result. there are multiple entries. Clicking on one of these is the same as clicking on the other ones. So this is the actual definition, or the reference definition of start activity for results. Okay, without the S. Okay, I mistyped. Start activity for result. There are actually multiple signatures. You can see that this is one. The next one is another one using bundle. Let's see here. This one starts with just a request code, and the other one starts with bundle. You can choose to do it, in multiple different ways. The second one is, okay. Let me show you the one that I'm talking about here. This one is interesting because because of the options parameter, you can specify parameters to the requested activity. In other words, in addition of saying I want you to start, you can also specify some additional information with options, which is inside the bundle. So if you read the documentation here, launch an activity for which you'd like to have a result when it's finished. That's okay. That's all of the calls with this name can do it. When this activity exits, your on activity result method will be called. Same with all the other ones. Note that this method should only be used with intent protocols that are defined to return a result. In other protocols, you may not get the result when you expect. As a special case, if you call this with result code greater than or equal to 0 during the initial onCreate, onResume of your activity, your window will not be displayed until a result is returned back. Okay, so this means your activity is not going to get control back until the result is non-negative. If it is negative, then your screen does not get control either. And the parameters in the options, additional options for how the activity should start. And you can read this part here for more detail, which is it's calling context.start activity with the intent and also the bundle. So if you click on this one, it shows you what the bundle is going to do. Additional options for the activity of how the activity should be started. Maybe no if there are no options. See activity options for how to build a bundle supplied here. There are no supported definitions for building it manually. Okay. So let's go ahead and go back to our notes here and take a look at some code. So here we have, just don't have enough width to do it. Let's see. Make it as wide as this. Okay, we'll take a look at the first line first. The first line creates an intent. Now, in this case, the intent is created. You have to basically say who is requesting in the intent. And here I'm just referring to quote-unquote the parent activity, the requesting activity. And since I'm also trying to start a child activity, a particular child activity, instead of just saying, oh, I want to use a browser to look at a certain URL, which you can do as well. But in this case, I'm trying to start a particular activity that belongs to the same package. Okay, it's the same package as my application. So maybe this is a good time to actually get started with Eclipse, so I can show you the actual method of doing this. You can see that even with Eclipse being a really nice tool, this class is does have a little bit more complexity compared to the previous one, where we can just drag and drop using App Inventor. But at the same time, we also get more flexibility as well. All right, so what we'll do is we'll create a new project, or I'm going to create a new project to illustrate this point. Okay, so we'll call the application name Tale of Two Activities. Okay, and just to be consistent with all the stuff that we have been doing, I'm going to change the package name to edu.losrios.arc.class.project. my last name. Okay. And I'm also going to change the minimum required SDK to 11, because there are a lot of new features supported by API 11 that are not supported by APIs prior to 11. Okay, so that's really one of the kind of landmark APIs. The differences between 11 and 12 is minimum. Okay, if you have 11, you are going to cover a lot of newer features when it comes to the applications. You're going to lose some support for older devices, but I think it's worth it, if we are talking about these additional features. The next one, I'm just going to use all the defaults here. Okay, so it will create an activity on its own, which is the default activity. I'm not going to spend any time to mess around with the icon. And let's go ahead and start with a blank, basic activity. And you can see that this time I can use master detail flow. It doesn't complain anymore, because this particular type of layout is supported by API 11, but not supported by prior versions. So that's one particular reason why I started off with API 11. But for this particular exercise, a blank activity is fine. I'm not going to do anything else. And I'll take all the defaults here. Main activity is the name of the class representing the screen, and the layout name is activity main. This is all automatic. Okay, so I'm not going to specify any navigation type. You can also see that these types are now supported because I changed the minimum API to 11. Whereas before, when we used the other API, was it 9 or 7?
8.
It was 8? Okay. These navigation types were not supported. In this case, I'm just going to pick none, because that's not the focus of this exercise. All right. So this creates the basic framework and all the basic stuff of this application. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is to create a second activity, because after all, I want to make this an example of how to start an activity from inside another activity. So we'll go ahead and start to create the second activity, the second screen for the same application. The technique that we talk about will also apply when you are starting an activity from a different application. But since it's much easier to debug it this way, when both screens belong to the same activity and the concepts or the way you do it is exactly the same, I'm just going to attach the second activity to the same application. So you can basically just do a right click here, click on new, and you can see the activity is not here. That's okay. You go to other, and now we can go to Android. And the first item under Android is Android activity, and that's the one that you have to pick if you just want to add a new screen to a particular application. Are there any questions about these steps, how to create a new activity for your application?
Is there a reason why it's not on the main menu when you right click on it? I mean, since it's just free activity.
Fairly common that people would not want to do that. I don't know, but it's okay. I mean, as long as we can know how to find it, it's fine. So we're gonna click next here, and I forgot to turn my tasker back on because I forgot. Well, I turned it off, because Monday was a holiday, but I forgot to turn it back on, for today. So let me go to tasker and turn that task back on.
Did it remind you about roll?
That's a good one. All right. Okay, so mine is off now, and the roll sheet is here. How many classes have I forgotten to take roll in CISP 310?
You take it home.
All right, there you go. All right, so it presents the same kind of screens, when it creates an activity. I'm not going to go for anything that's fancy, so I'm just going to go for the usual type, blank activity. But this time, I do have to change the activity name, because when you look at layout name, it's having a problem. Okay, there's a little check mark. because activity main as a layout already exists. It doesn't complain about the activity name, which is kind of surprising because that also exists already. Okay, so we don't want to use the same name for this class because it's already used. So the best way to do it is to change it, and I'm just going to call it sub-activity because this is an activity that will be requested by the main activity here. You certainly do not want to just use sub when this activity serves a particular purpose. So you want to name the activity based on its intent of why people might want to use this activity. The other thing you might observe is when you change the activity name, it automatically changes the layout name as well, which is fine. Okay, that's kind of cool, and also the title. So for this, in this case, this is a test application, so I'm not going to make any changes to the title either. I'm just going to let it stay as the default. I do not want to check, launcher activity. In other words, when this application is started from the launcher, which is typically how a end user starts an activity, I don't want this screen to be, launched automatically. I want this one to be launched by its own activity, the other one. Okay.
So what would it mean if you check that box?
If I check this box, then the default activity is no longer main activity. It becomes this one.
Oh.
Because only one can be the one that is started up by the launcher. So the other one by default is the launcher activity. But if I want to make the new one the launcher activity, I can, but that will take the checkbox out of the other one, which is not what I want to do at this point.
Right.
So that's like what you'd want to do for a splash screen if you had a sub activity.
If you want a splash screen, that's a good question. You can make a splash screen the launcher activity, so that when you launch it when you start it from the launcher, that will be the first screen presented. There might be other ways to do it too, because on create you might be able to put something on the screen and just display the splash part of it. I'm not going to specify any additional stuff here. Click next, and then we can just click finish. And now you can see that we have two source files. Okay, one source file per activity. One is for the main one, which was created when we first started the project itself. The second one is created when we added a new screen. When you look into resources and look under layout, there are also two files, because one file is for the sub activity and the other one is for the main activity. So there are two layout files. They are independent to each other. You can make changes to one without making changes to the other one. Are we doing okay so far with these concepts? Okay, we're just adding one more screen, and before we do anything else, let's go ahead and start a virtual machine. I typically like to do this, when I just, do something, I want to test the application, make sure that there's nothing wrong with it, instead of, waiting until I have, hundreds of lines, of code written, then test it. Because at that point, it will be difficult to find out, okay, why is it not starting up correctly? Close this, need that more. The virtual machine should be starting. It's just taking a little bit longer than I expect. Well, as we are waiting for the virtual machine to start, that really is taking a lot longer. Let me just double check and make sure that the AVI is starting up. Nope, doesn't look that way. Because if that is starting up, it should take a lot more resources. So oh, there we go. As soon as I threaten to check it again, it just says, okay, I'm here.
Seems going to be loading at normal speed.
It was running a little bit faster when I was doing this at home. But then I was using an internal hard drive because I think it's I/O bound because it has to load the entire image, which is a fairly large file. So USB 2.0 is just not really exactly cutting it, when I want it to be responsive. Okay. So now I have the virtual machine started up. Go back to Android here, and I'm not going to go through the usual, the debug version here. I'm just going to run it as an Android application and switch back to the virtual machine, and it starts up. It asks me, do I want to auto monitor the logcat, and at this point I want to monitor for errors only. I go back to the virtual machine, and that's the application. Not exactly exciting, okay, because I don't even have a way to start the other application, nor the logic to start not the application, but start the other activity. So right now I know it has two screens, but I have no way to trigger the other one. The other part that you might actually see here is it has an action bar. This top bar here is called the action bar, and it has this little thing here, which is the settings. It is replacing the menu button. In other words, when you're writing applications, don't count on having this menu button as a hardwired button on your device anymore. It is deprecated. So the new way of doing things is to use a soft button. In other words, use what we call the action bar. And here, is the this is called the overflow area, where you can put all the extra items of menu items, so that your application has access to here. This is the replacement of the menu button, basically. Okay, so we'll get into this later. There's a lot more stuff, if once we get into how to specify the menu of your application, there's a lot more stuff that we have to talk about first. So that's why we are not, getting into the menu system just yet of your screens and your application. Okay, so this application is running. It's not exactly exciting at this point. So I'm going to need a way to trigger the creation of the second screen. There are several ways to do it. I can just say, okay, if someone touches this particular screen or this particular activity, I just want the other one to start. That's okay too. So let's go ahead and do it in a much more simplistic way here. So in main activity, I'm going to override a particular event handler. So I'm going to say override public void on touch. And obviously I cannot remember, what is the name of the handler. It complains about, okay, this is good.
Touchdown.
Touchdown, okay. But this is also good because you can see that, when I have a problem, because onClick is not one of the methods already supplied by the superclass, it complains about what it is and a suggestion to fix it, okay? Because if you read the message here, it says the method onClick of type main activity must override or implement a super type. Okay, let me read the rest here. A super type method. It's just because the superclass in this case, which is activity, does not have this method, and that's why override is helpful, because it tells the compiler and say, hey, check to make sure that the superclass actually has this method, and since it does not, it comes back as an error. Okay, so we'll go ahead and change that to on touch down, and this time. Nope. Well, we'll just go ahead and read the look up the documentation. Android activity, and we just have to look up on. Well, that's helpful. Let's see. We want to look up. Okay, now here's a whole bunch of on key down. On touch event, there we go. Okay, it's just called on touch event. So right here, on touch event, and open curly brace, press the enter key, and we still have a problem. And I know what the problem is. Do you guys know what the problem is?
Move the parameter.
The parameters are missing. Okay, so let's go back and hover over the underline here and see if it knows how to fix it. The method on touch event of touch main activity. It's because of the missing parameters, it complains that it's not implemented yet. So what we need to do is to specify the parameters, which is motion event. Okay, so motion event E. And it's complaining that motion event cannot be resolved to a type because we did not import from the motion event here. So we want to import. See, it tells you quick fixes.
I think
so
if you try running it, it will add the import statement automatically.
if I try to run it,
Yeah, I think I did that one time and it added it automatically.
well, it also presents these quick fixes which are clickable. If I click one, it is automatically going to put it up here. Yep, so it does it automatically. And the void part is also wrong. Change return type to Boolean. So the program basically just self-detects its problem and fix it. Add return statement. it literally writes itself. I mean, wow.
And you just have it auto apply all suggestions and then verify at the end.
Wow, I guess the whole concept of intent has just reached a new level. Tech, what would you like to do today? All right. So now the on-touch event is kind of tricky because even one single touch is registered, with at least 2 events. Because when you touch it, it's one. When you touch up, it's the second event. Okay. So this is not really exactly the right thing to do because it would have 2 events, queued up at least when you touch it. Just click like that. Okay. It's much better to use a button approach because if you use a button approach, it's just one single event. Okay, it automatically what we call debounces for you. So even though if you touch a button and you just kind of rub the screen while you're touching the button, it is still registered as one single event, one single click event. So that's a much better way to do it. So this is not exactly a good way to do it. I'm gonna take it back and because of that particular aspect. Yep.
Wouldn't there still be 2? One to register that you actually touched the button, and the second one to actually detect if you released your finger on the button.
If you use the touch event, yes. But if you use the click event, no. The click event is only registered once, when you actually press the button. So when you release the button, it does not register as a click.
Oh, I thought a portion like the code before that. It's like one's a touch event, then it gets trimmed down to the click event.
For a button?
Yeah.
Yeah, but for a button, you don't have to intercept the on touch event. It's just the on click event that we're interested in.
So when you click the button, it will do whatever you want it to do without having to release it. It just automatically does it when you press down.
You just have to watch out. You just have to listen to the click event when you have a button. But there's no such thing for an activity. An activity does not have a on-click event. Doesn't have a click event. So it has a very primitive way of handling touches. So that when you touch it, it's an event. When you move your finger, each movement is an activity. When you release, it's also an event, and when you release, it's another event.
No, but you were saying when you have a button on the screen, once you press it, then it does whatever before you have to release it. It just does it when you click down.
I think you have to release first. So when you click down, it does not register the click. When you release it, then the click happens. The click event is generated.
Because there's a difference between on-click and on-long click.
Right.
On-click is time when it goes past a certain amount of time when you
Right.
click the button.
Yep. But those are only implemented for buttons and not for activity. They're both inheriting from Vue, and actually these are all inherited from Vue itself because Vue itself can also handle touch events. All right, so we'll do it the complicated way of using a button, which means we have to add a button first. So I'm going to add a little button here, and we'll do the things that your homework assignment is suggesting to do, several things. We'll change the text on here. Yep. Question?
Yeah. When you drag a button in that, the arrows that it shows, is that just showing like what it's aligning itself to or whatever?
Right,
Okay.
because it's snapping. It's
Yeah.
trying to snap to important, lines.
Is there a way to get rid of that?
Feature?
Well,
So it doesn't
turn off?
snap.
Yeah.
I think that's due to the layout being relative.
Okay.
If you change it from relative, you may not get that.
I think you will still get it. It's just giving you different clues at different times.
Yeah, I think it's actually locked to the position on the screen. As you see
Okay.
right there, it says relative layout.
Right. All right. So we'll go ahead and define the string, and we're going to put it into the string table. So the string itself is going to say start activity, and the name of the string is just start. There's a certain convention. I'm just going to say start activity here. Click OK. So now we have a. Okay. So now we have the button calling with the text start activity on it, and we want the button to do certain things, right? So we now want to attach our code to the on-click event of the button. Do you guys still remember how to do this? We talked about this last time. There are several ways to do it. Since we only have one button on this activity, it's easy because we can just go ahead and use the activity itself to implement on-click listener. But I'm not going to do it the easy way. I'm going to do it the complicated way. Okay, we'll use the anonymous class and all that stuff. Now to do that, we have to attach code to the onCreate because we have to register that this is an object to handle the on-click event for that button. For those of you who kind of remember this whole approach, the first thing is we have to use button. Now the nice thing is, once again, we can go ahead and no, it does not want to do that.
Yeah,
Fine.
it really does not want to suggest proper ways to fix it with that.
Sometimes
approach.
it does and sometimes it does not, right? Okay, so
I
we'll
think
go
it
ahead
will.
and go
I
ahead.
think it will as soon as you define the equal, the right hand side of.
Oh, okay.
It did it for me. I didn't
Okay.
manually add it.
Yeah, but either way works. So we want to go find. Okay, can you give me a clue here too? Nope. It's find resource by ID. Nope. Was probably close, but not exactly. That's okay. Time to read my own notes. Alright, the last part of this has the code that we need to copy, which is this part here. Find view by ID. There we go. Find view by ID. Okay, go back to here. Find view by ID. We have r.id and then dot. I think this is just button one. This on my phone here. Syntax error. Insert assignment operator expression to complete expression. Oh, I haven't specified what to do with it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we want to set the on-click listener. So we're going to do this. All right. So here comes the kind of complicated part that we talked about last time already. Is how do we create an object on the fly that is of an anonymous class implementing the on-click listener interface? Do you guys want to hear that sentence again? Okay, so here, right here, at this line, on this line, we want to do the following. We want to create an object out of an anonymous class, and that class is going to implement the on-click listener interface, and including in it a method called onClick, so that we know what to do when this button is clicked. So we want to do all of those things within this portion. So we're going to do this. The creation part is easy, okay, because you just say new. New is an operator in Java to allocate storage. And then the second part is onClick listener, open paren, close paren. That specifies that we are creating an object and it's going to implement onClick listener. And then we use open curly brace and close curly brace for the definition of the anonymous class. In other words, this class has no name. I cannot refer and make more instances of this particular class. Obviously, it's complaining because we did not import, so I'm going to do the import here. It is done automatically. Nice. Okay. What do we do next? We have to implement a particular onClick method, right? And that's going to be, I'm going to look at my own notes again because I forgot the return type of onClick. It's public void onClick and has a view. Okay, so paste it here. There we go. And now we just have to implement this particular, or specify what to do with this onClick. Now here's the really, really tricky part, because which class am I in at this point? Okay, in other words, in this context, okay, am I in activity as a class, or am I in the anonymous class which is embedded inside activity? We are now inside the anonymous class, okay? So let me just fix up everything first, okay, to make the program run again with that button, but without any action, involved here. So we'll go ahead. Button 1 cannot be resolved, or it is not a field. Okay, let's check that. It's just it doesn't use the ID. It is button 1. Okay, I think it has to do with the file not being saved yet. So we'll go ahead and save everything first, and that took care of the first problem. The new view onClick listener must implement the inherited abstract method view onClick listener onClick view.
There's an onClick.
But that's onClick right there.
It's going to create
Say again?
It's going to create an override and protected voice onClick on the bottom of the line. And it's where the code is.
Oh, okay, because it's an interface.
I think it's outside of the
Yeah.
create so far.
I don't need override here because there's no class that it's inheriting from. Okay, let's see. New onClick listener public. That should do it. The type new view onClick listener must implement the inherited abstract method. View onClick listener onClick view. Oh, okay, it's complaining about view not imported yet. So we'll go ahead and import it. Import. There we go. There we go. This is really cool. I mean, having Eclipse, it just kind of fixes itself. It gives me suggestions. The other way to do software development is just to use VI and then the Java compiler.
What's the warning about? The motion event?
There's nothing inside the anonymous class.
I'm not used. It's
Yeah.
not. It's not used. It's referred to, but it's never used. None of my code is referring to it because I just deleted that. So that's nice too, because it's give you a warning and say, well, you think that you are using this particular method, but or this particular class, but you're not. Okay, so we can delete that. Doesn't cause any harm, but it is a warning. All right, so I think we are ready to go. And switch back to the simulator.
Would it still import the necessary resources even if you're not using it?
No, it will take up extra time for the compiler, but since I'm not actually making anything out of that class, it should not have any extra code when it comes to the actual code of the application. The warning is more of a of the nature of actually just warning you, because you have all these imports, but you're not actually making use of that. And so it's a warning because you might be thinking that you're using that class, but you're not, and that's why it's a warning. But it doesn't really cause any overhead at runtime. All right, so that now we have the onClick method. It's time to specify I want to start the other activity at this point. Okay, now that gets a little bit interesting because let's go ahead and read the notes again. Okay, the notes over here specifies that we want to use the method called, first of all we have to create an intent. Okay, in order to create an intent, we have to say who is the one that is requesting, and then we want to specify the package, the full package path of the child activity, the name of the child activity class, and then a dot class, because that really specifies the actual class definition, so that the intent knows what class represents the child activity or the sub-activity that we're creating. Okay, so let's go ahead and just write that one line of intent and see what happens. It's not going to work. Okay, so we'll say intent I, so we're creating an intent here, and is intent imported? Nope. Okay, we'll go ahead and do it. I can do it manually. It's under content. Okay, so intent I is, allocate a new instance of an intent. Now if you look up the Android documentation, they use this, okay? And then we have the second part, I need to take a look here. The second part is the full path of the package plus the name of the class itself. Okay, that's okay, we can do that. That part I remember because the full path of the package is edu.losrios.arc.cisp363, and you can tell that it knows the entire path of the package. Okay, so we'll go ahead and put this in, and then we have to specify the class name itself, which is sub activity in this case, and then a dot class after that, so that we are referring to the actual class definition of this class and not an instance of this class. That part is not the problem. The problem, well, it's complaining because I'm missing a semicolon here. Okay, so there we go. The problem has to do with the first part here. The constructor intent new view dot onClick listener that is undefined. So how can that be undefined? Because Google, a lot of code example from Android, the online Android documentation uses this. Well, uses this code as an example, but it doesn't work in this case for one specific reason. What exactly is this? THIS.
Current object.
It's the current object, okay? It's whatever object that is executing this method. But exactly what is the type of that object? Which class definition am I in right now? The immediate class definition. Anonymous, very good. Okay, so we are currently in the wrong context. So this is now referring to the wrong thing because this definition onClick is inside the definition of an anonymous class, and that anonymous class has absolutely nothing to do with an activity. Okay? Am I making any sense so far? Kind of? All right? Yep.
Is there an easy way just to say like parent of this?
There's no such thing as an easy way to refer to the parent. The button does know its parent. Okay, there's a link back to the parent. You can use a get parent or something similar to get back to the parent. But there are other ways to fix this problem too. Okay, now let's take a look at some of the ways to fix this particular problem, which will look really kind of funky. Okay, it's going to look kind of funky.
Is there no super this?
Hmm?
There's no super this.
Well, super doesn't help because there's no inheritance.
Oh,
This is
okay.
an anonymous class, and anonymous classes cannot inherit. They can implement interfaces, but they cannot inherit from a superclass. So we cannot, we cannot benefit from that either. Okay. So there are several ways to fix this. This one is kind of funky. You guys will go like, what? How can that work? Okay. So we'll go ahead and use an activity type here to define myself. Okay, this is a field, or this is called a field because it's a instance variable in this class. And when this activity is initialized, I will simply say myself is this. Okay, this is basically just a shorthand. In other words, it goes into the constructor of this class. When this class is constructed, that particular field is automatically initialized to this, which is a reference to the object that is trying to do the construction. Am I doing okay so far with this? Sort of? Okay. Which is usually not needed, but I kind of need this one here because now I can refer to myself. Now that is really weird because how can a subclass, okay, well, I shouldn't say subclass, how can a anonymous class that is defined nested within an activity class have access to a instance variable in this case? Doesn't that feel kind of awkward to you? Because, okay, let me explain why this should be awkward, okay? Whose method is this? It is not a method of main activity, is it? It's a method of an anonymous class. So when we are inside there, we are using the context of an object of the anonymous class as the context. But that object should have no knowledge of the enclosing class definition. But it does. Okay? That is actually one of the really useful attributes of an anonymous class, because the inside an anonymous class definition, it has full access, full visibility of everything that is surrounding it. The enclosing class definition is visible to the anonymous class. Yep.
But isn't it like renaming the main activity or activity to myself? I mean, it's just giving a different name, or overriding the initial name of activity, giving it myself.
Well, it's a reference, right? Myself is a reference.
Yeah, it's just a reference. So it doesn't matter whether this is main activity or not, it still serves the same purpose. Because the only need of myself is to put it here, and over here, it doesn't even have to be an activity, it only has to be a context. But an activity is already inheriting from a context. So, basically we are casting myself all the way up to the superclass that is needed by intent, the constructor of intent. So it's okay this way. Okay? So this is one way to fix it. But there's another way to fix it too. Okay? The other way to fix it is a little bit more elegant. So I'm going to take this away and turn it into a method instead. So I will use myself as a method. And so those, okay, we'll make it public first, okay, and then we'll go back and change it later on and see how far we can push the restriction and still make this work. So this becomes now a method, and it returns a main activity. Okay, so that turns it into a method, and we're just going to return this. All right. So inside, I'm just going to say, oh, okay, let's go ahead and invoke myself. Because myself is a method of the enclosing class definition, and therefore it is also visible to this one here. It's complaining that the local variable I is not used because, well, I'm going to use it later. Okay. So right now the focus is just how do we create the intent itself. This doesn't make any sense, does it? It doesn't make any sense unless there's an implicit inheritance here. What do you think is the implicit inheritance?
Public.
Well, no, but which class is inheriting from which other class? This doesn't make any sense unless there's an implicit inheritance. Come on, you guys can do it. Okay, this makes some sense because myself is public. What if I make it protected? I still don't get any error messages. Now, what is the difference between protected versus public when we define methods inside a class?
You can see above one, below another.
Correct. Now, if it's public, it means everybody can see it. Okay, I can have an entirely different class that has nothing to do with this package. As long as I import it, I can still see it. Okay, that's what public means. If I use protected, what does that mean?
Only that class and classes in right now can use it.
Okay, exactly. So this class and all the subclasses can see it. Okay, what if I turn it into private? That means it's only visible within this class. Even the subclasses cannot see it. Okay, so let's see what happens when we change myself to private. Still no problem. Okay, now this really should be bugging, a person who's starting up with object-oriented programming, because who exactly is this when I call myself on this particular line? Let me turn on the line number so I can refer to the line numbers. Okay, well, here's the line number switch. Source, maybe. Toggle comments.
Maybe under Navigator.
Yeah, do a search. Show line numbers. Okay. There we go. So on line 24, we have, it's mysterious because on line 24, it can use the method myself. Okay. Now that by itself doesn't seem to be a big deal because it's just a method of a class that is enclosing that's enclosing this anonymous class definition. But when you invoke a method like this, who exactly is this when we get into myself? We are supposed to be doing this inside an object of an anonymous class. And yet, when we execute the method myself, which goes all the way out here, it thinks that it is an object of class main activity. So what is that telling you? What is the relationship between the anonymous class and the surrounding, the enclosing class definition? It is as if it is inheriting. Okay, it is as if the anonymous class is extending the class that is surrounding it. But it's even more because even though this method is now private, it can still see it. Am I making any sense so far? Kind of?
Well,
Yeah?
it would make sense because private members can be accessed within the class, and that class definition is inside the class.
Right. But in a way, it is also an extension to main activity as a class. Now, I'm hoping you guys still remember the triangle thing. Okay. In other words, if I look at this triangle here as the class definition of main activity, so I'll just label this as main, uppercase main activity. Okay. The anonymous class is the red portion. It's almost like this. The anonymous class, which is from line 22 to line 26 at this point on the whiteboard, on the projector, is actually an extension, is a red triangle that is enclosing main activity. What is the extra portion here? On click. So that's why when you refer to this inside on click, it is referring to the entire red triangle, and the type doesn't match. Okay, but when you refer to, but then it has access to myself, which is a subroutine in main activity. Myself is here. Okay, so when you invoke myself, it is invoking this particular method. But this method thinks that it is inside a regular main activity object, and so this now refers to the entire, just the black portion, which is fine because that's exactly what we wanted to think. But this can only work when a reference to the anonymous class object is actually also a reference to a main activity, because otherwise this method could not work at all. Okay, is that making sense? No, kind of? Okay. Well, for those of you who are planning to take cisp 401, the Java class, the actual Java class, you can present this to Iraj and ask him, how can this be done? I mean, we are in a different class. What is exactly this THIS? When we refer to this, okay? Because this is the only way it can be explained. I look at things from a slightly different perspective because I used to write compilers. So I kind of look at things from the compiler perspective and say, okay, but how can this be implemented in reality and not really just look at the language feature? All right, so let's run it because it should work now. Oh, wait, no, it doesn't work because I have not made use of the intent. Okay, so let's go ahead and just make use of the intent. And going back to the notes here, the next line is, let's not even worry about the next line just yet, okay? The next line is just adding a parameter to the starting point. So what we want to do is just to start the activity for results from the parent's perspective and use that as an intent, and we'll give it a request code that is non-zero. Okay, that's what we'll do. Go back to the code here, and here we can say myself again dot start activity for result, and the intent is our I, and then the request code is really just an integer. So for the time being, I'm just going to use a constant here. Bad programming practice, but it's going to be okay for now. Well, I mean, the focus is not that. Okay, I don't want the detail to kind of override the focus. So the focus is start activity for result, which is a method of an activity, of the activity class. So at this point, we should be able to start up the next screen, the other screen. The other screen doesn't do a single thing, so it's okay. So let's go ahead and get it started here. And start the application. Yes, go back to the simulator. And I think this is already restarted already. So let's click Start Activity. And it pops up the second screen. Sub activity is the other screen, and it works. Okay, it does work. Let me see. I think it came in a little bit later. That's okay. All right, so it all works out, okay? Now, the next question is, when I'm in this activity, how do I get back to the previous one?
Back button.
The back button, exactly. Okay, so the back button will do this, and we're now back to the first one, okay? Yep.
So I have a question that may be a little bit outside of this, but what if, like you remember in the other class, we talked about locking the screen element size to the screen size itself?
Okay.
You know what I'm talking about? Like using an orientation sensor. So how would you do that
In
here?
here,
Yeah.
if you use relative, you don't really have to worry too much about it. As far as the screen layout is concerned, okay, this is kind of like a kind of sidetracking a little bit. But when you go to the screen layout part here, you can actually change the device type, and it can show you what it would look like using a different device. So if you switch to a larger device, you can check that, and that's what it looks like. So using the relative layout, it will automatically flow the objects to try to utilize the entire screen that you're trying to use. So this is automatically supporting multiple resolutions. It's just that when you're doing the preview, this controls, how you want it to look like in the preview. But you can install the app on multiple devices, and it's going to look, quote unquote, look right, because the layout itself, using the relative layout, it will flow the items, the way it is supposed to. The framework will do that part for you. It doesn't try to force the resolution to a artificial resolution. Yep.
Then you go back to the code.
Go back to
the code.
To the code, yeah.
Yeah. What does it make reference to the sub-activity?
The sub-activity is, right here.
Okay.
It's rather long. Since I don't have really any use of this portion, let me just kind of drag it over and hide it.
Just minimize it.
There we go. Doesn't help that much, but yep.
So how do you switch activities in the code instead of hitting the back button?
Say again?
How do you switch activities in the code instead of hitting the back button?
Instead of using the back button,
Yeah.
you can always say finish. I'll deal with that next. Yep.
Now, if we were to transfer some variable from main activity to sub-activity, would it be in this anonymous class, or would it
You can specify that as a part of the intent.
be intent?
Yeah. It's either the intent or the bundle, because remember, there's one way to construct, one way to invoke start activity with result with a bundle. So it's either with the bundle or it's with the intent. All right. So let's go ahead and try to pass something to the sub-activity, but we also need the sub-activity to actually do something about it. So we'll go ahead and change the programs just a little bit to reflect that. So getting back to the notes here, the second statement is I dot put extra, and then we can basically put associate a tag. Okay, it's called a key with the value, whatever it needs to be passed to the sub-activity in this case. So we'll go ahead and put this line of code into the sample program and see if it works. So I put extra, and the first one is the key. So in this case, we'll just call it param1. As long as the sub activity knows what to look for, it should still be able to locate it. And then the value in this case is just a string. Okay, so I'm going to use a literal string again, which is going to get some warnings, but in this case it's okay. So we'll just say passed from main to sub. All right. And it's complaining about the semicolon. Let me see if I can fix that. Okay. So we'll put it here. Syntax error, insert colon to complete, and it doesn't do it automatically. It doesn't have a thing that I can click to fix it. Darn.
Write a script. Write a script.
Write a script or extend Eclipse. All right. So we'll go ahead and run it again. Obviously it's not going to be visible. Okay, even if it is successful, it's not visible. We still want to run it again just to make sure that we did not break anything accidentally. Okay, nothing here because the sub activity itself is not looking for anything. It's like, okay, I'm just starting here. All right. So now we want to focus on the sub activity and say, well, where can we possibly get the parameter passed by main activity? What do you think? It's already here. The framework is here already. It just doesn't have the code to look for it. On create, exactly. So here is the question. In on create, is this bundle a part of the intent or not? Okay, that really is a question. I have not looked up any references to find it out yet, but we can find it out pretty soon. So we'll go ahead and say, how do we reflect that in the subscreen, in the sub activity? Well, there's a quick and easy way and a dirty way to do it.
Yeah.
It already has a text field, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So we'll go ahead and just change that according to this content. So how do we do that?
You have to catch what it's being.
Well, it's a text view, okay? So we're going to cast whatever coming back from this call to a text view. And the other thing is a find view by ID again. And we have r.id dot text view 1. Text view. One. And I want to double check just to be sure. So if I look at this, sign ID. Oh, it doesn't have an ID yet. So we want to call it text 2. Okay, now we can go back and revert. All right.
Lowercase b.
Oh. So if I put a dot here, oh, I have to import text view. Import text view. Nice. And I can now set text to. Oops. Well, let's just test this part without using the parameters yet. Okay, so I'm just going to set text to something, but without using the bundle as the parameter. So we'll just set text to. Okay, let me see this. And just run the application again. All right. It's undefined for the type of activity. Find view by ID.
It's lowercase f.
Okay, thank you. Actually, it made a suggestion to change to find view by ID, lowercase f. That's going to be, fortunately, it has stopped. All right, so it's crashing. Sorry?
I have so many of those.
You have so
If
many
you-
of those?
If you click the search icon on the emulator, it'll bring the app back up. It'll be its first.
I think it has to do with this part here. I think we have to change the order and put this next. Yep. It's because it'll be the order is important in this case because the first one set content view, which is basically, bringing up the layout first. And then the second one, will go to the text view 2 item, which is just a label, and change that. So I can't really change the order because otherwise I'll be trying to modify something that is not on screen yet.
Your forward reference.
Yep. But the object may not even be created yet, okay? Because this call here on line 13 is going to do the allocation and finish up, the initialization of the activity. So I cannot really do it in the opposite direction. All right. So now that we know set text works, we'll go ahead and change that and make use of the bundle and see if we can, find the parameter passed through this way. So we'll refer to this as saved instance state dot get string get string, so we'll have to give that a try. Get string and then give it the key, which is the same as last time, run one. All right, so this is going to be the final test. Nope, that did not work. Now, if I use getString with a default value, that would probably work because if it cannot find the actual parameter, it can return a default value here. So, try again. Oh, it requires API level 12, so this is not going to work. Because I specify 11 as the minimum, and it requires the next API level up.
Yep. You can change it.
You can change it. You can change it by changing the XML file, because that's the one thing that specifies what version we are running.
You can actually do it through the through Eclipse itself. I can't remember how.
It's probably just an edit, the project.
I think you just go into manifest and just change it there.
Well, that would be the most easiest way to do it.
Yeah, you can do it through the manifest. Because that's why I was asking. Because if you try to do it using the actual XML, not the manifest XML, but the actual project's XML, Eclipse hasn't received the update. You actually have to do it through the manifest.
Ah.
So go, yeah.
Yep.
Go back to manifest and it says uses SDK.
Go back to manifest.
And go up.
Use it.
Click on uses SDK.
Yeah. You can
Okay.
change it there.
Yeah, well, it's another view to look at the same document, but this is a much. The chances of making a mistake here is less, messing up the actual syntax. But they do the same thing. All right. So save it first. Go back to here, and the error went away. So here's my question: do you guys think that the compiler is actually running as I make changes to it, and that's why it can find the problems, or do you think it's something else that is doing all the checking?
It's probably like a debugger.
I think it's just referring to the signatures for each component, or everything you're adding, see if they match up to the version that you have selected.
But that requires the editor itself to have a lot of knowledge of not only Java, but also know a lot about Android applications, all the classes, and so on.
So do you think that when you make a change, it runs the compiler through to see if it will work?
I think it looks for pulses. Okay, when you're typing really fast, it doesn't do a single thing. But as long as it detects like a stop time, then it will actually run the compiler.
That would make sense if you could test that, I guess, like write a small program, then write a large program, and then pause and see if it takes longer for the warnings to come up on a longer program.
I have not noticed any delays in saying that there's a problem.
So what's the largest app you've written in it? How many lines?
Not that large, but there was, while typing, as soon as I pressed space, it immediately returned an error.
It may be looking for white space then, or pauses.
But it still doesn't negate the fact that it's doing quite a bit of analysis just to get it to work. It's still not working, so it means saved instance state does not have this parameter, or it's not returning the right kind of value.
And does Eclipse even have access to the compiler if you're not
Yeah, it does.
on its own end?
No,
It has to
it has to have the
compile it.
compiler.
Oh,
Yeah, it has to have access to the compiler. Okay, so this
never mind
one, it can't really change the. Okay, so the attempt to pass something into it, it has failed. Okay, but we do have to finish this. Well, yeah, I guess we can finish it next time. The other portion definitely works. Okay, getting started by another activity, and we can pass the result back. So the question is, how do you pass anything back? The mechanism to do that is to override the finish method of the class of the activity that is requested. Okay, not the requesting one, but the requested one. So in this case, in our example, okay, go back to this code here. So what we need to do is to override the finish method. And the finish method, I think, is a public void finish. And it has a parameter of, nope, no parameters. Now the most important part about finish is you have to remember to actually call the finish of the superclass, because otherwise it would not do all the things that it needs to do in order to do the finishing. After that, you can now specify the actual result, and you can see the result is about the same thing. You know, you have to use the intent again, and then use put extra to put the result into the intent, and then set the result based on that. So I'm just going to copy and paste these 3 lines or 4 lines of code. Copy and paste it over here. Here we go. And it's going to import intent. That will fix that problem. There is a small delay. Yep.
For the retrieving the parameters you passed, looks like it's just get intent, get extras, get string, and the name of the parameter string that you gave it.
Okay. So that means up here, get intent, and then just get string.
Get parameters.
Oh, get parameters. Nope, there's no get parameter.
Or get extras, I mean.
And then get strings. Same one.
Get string and the parameter, the name of the parameter, yeah.
Which I have specified already here. Alright, so we can give that a try.
Take the extra part off of it.
Oh, the second?
Yeah. Not sure what that would do.
But that's a default value. In case parameter is not defined, that's what it's supposed to return.
Okay.
And that's the one that require API level 12 instead of API level 11. Alright, so we're almost done. Let's go. Oh, okay, excellent. So it's not a part of the bundle, it's actually a method to get to the intent. The bundle does not reflect the intent. Alright, so we only have one more thing to do. When we are finished, we want to pass this back to the main activity. So now we are switching back to the main activity and see how we can capture this result. That part is also in the notes. Okay, in the requesting activity, this is what we need to do. So I'm just going to be copying and pasting here back into the Eclipse. So we are going to override this method here. Obviously, the request code is not here because I did not define the constant, so I'm just going to use 1 here. That's because I used 1 when I started up the other activity, so I'm going to check in for the 1 here. And this part of the code requires just a little bit of explanation. The first part is, this is a event handler of the requesting activity. It has a default method already implemented, not implemented, but defined by activity as a class. Since this is a subclass, I'm going to override this particular method. There are 3 parameters to this method, and this method is called when a requested activity is done, finished, and return back to this one with a result. There are 3 parameters. The first one, which is the request, this is the very same number that I used earlier to start off the other one. In other words, whatever number I specify here is the number that I'm getting back as the request. That number is useful because if you can only have one on activity result method per activity. So what if your activity can start off like 10 other activities, 10 different types of activities? So how can you identify which one is coming back? Because when it comes back, it's going to the same method. This is one way that you can find out, okay? Because you basically just have to identify, oh, okay, this one is labeled 1, the other one is labeled 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. So when it comes back, you need a switch statement. If there are many of these, you can just use a switch statement and say, okay, so who came back with a result this time? And then use a switch statement to find out, oh, okay, so last time I was requesting this one, and it's now coming back with a result. So the ID, the request ID, is really for this particular purpose. The other one is result. This one is not specified by the requesting activity. It is specified by the requested activity when it's done. So when we go back to sub-activity here, you can see that I set that number to result OK, which is indicating everything is fine. It was not canceled out. So getting back to the requesting activity here, if the result is not result OK and instead it is result underscore cancel, you might want to choose to do something differently. In other words, if the sub-activity allows you to change some of the settings and then the end user cancels out of that screen, then you don't want to make those changes effective in the main activity. On the other hand, if the result OK is the result, then you can go ahead and make the changes. So that's why there are two integers as a part of the parameters. The third one, which is the intent, is the one that carries the extra information. In other words, the end result, you can pass anything through the intent. And if we go back to sub-activity, we are passing back, in the extra portion, result 1 here. So in main activity, we can now, do something about that one. So we'll go ahead and do something about that, and we'll just go ahead and change text view 1 to reflect that portion. So we need to do something that we have done several times already. So we cast something into text view, and that is from find view by ID r.id. In this case, is text view 1 because we are back into the main activity. And then we'll use set text. Okay, it's complaining about text view. Come on, show me the complaint. Finally. So we can now say set. There's definitely a delay here. Do you guys notice that there's a delay? When the first time I put a dot, it didn't actually pop up the list of items. So there's definitely a delay here. I think it's really going to the there's a linkage between this and the compiler.
It's an issue with IntelliType or their version of it. It's how it interacts with the predicting.
Mm-hmm.
You have to hit insert character for it to trigger, and since you were already into the typing of the word, it did not trigger until you removed the period and started the period over again and started typing.
Okay, so this is the whole thing, missing a semicolon at the end. But this is the whole thing. The first part is just really finding text view 1. This part says I want to change the text of text view 1 to the following. So it really is the following part that is important, which is this part here. I'm getting the intent back as a parameter, and inside there I have result 1 as a key to the actual value that I want to retrieve, and this is what is being passed back from the sub activity back to the main activity. I'm just using the text view to reflect the result here. So let's go ahead and run it. To the emulator, start activity. This one is good because it's definitely getting the parameter from the main activity. when I press the back button, which is forcing the sub-activity screen to close and therefore triggering finish to be called, it comes back here and it's not changing hello world because it's not triggering the event.
The set text doesn't have any reference to variable coming back from the subactivity.
It's not getting triggered because it would have changed it to something or crashed.
Yeah.
So it's not getting triggered. Okay, so here's the other thing that you can do with your program. So what if your program is doing something like this and you don't know what is being passed back by these two things. So what you can do is to turn on a breakpoint. So we'll stop execution at this point. Now, if you turn on breakpoints, you don't want to go for full speed execution anymore. Instead, you want to do the debug portion here. Okay, so when you click this, it will give you, an option to do the debugging. I think I did this once before and I asked it not to do something. So we'll go click this one, go back here. Okay, now it's trying to switch the perspective. I'm not going to do the switching of the perspective. There's no need to do it. This kind of launch is configured to open the debug perspective when it suspends. This debug perspective is designed to support application debugging. It incorporates views for displaying the debug stack, variables, and breakpoint management. Do you want to open this perspective now? And the answer is no. Okay, I really do not need that right now. Because if you just hover the pointer over something, it tells you what it is or the value of that thing. So there's no need to, at least for this simple type of debugging, there's no need to deal with the other one. And this is why it's not getting into that result. It's not getting into this part of the program because result is not matching activity dot result OK because that is -1, and the result that I'm getting back is 0. Okay. So that means the fault is here in sub-activity. I am not getting the result OK passed back to main activity. And that might be an issue with the ordering of the things that I need to do, so I think finish needs to be done last. We'll go ahead and do it again. Let's go back to here. Disconnect first, and then run it again. Back to the emulator, start, back, and now we're back to here. And this time it's okay. So once again, it's the ordering of the super class method that is actually important. So this time, if I run it through at full speed, at this point, click this button, we can resume execution at full speed. Now, if you don't want to execute it at full speed because you also want to check, whether we get into the nested conditional statement or not, you can do the single step. There are two types of single step. One is step into, and the other one is step over. If you use a step into, in this case it doesn't matter because we are not invoking any methods. If you're invoking a method, step into will get into the method itself, so you can basically nest all the way down to a subroutine. The other one is stepping over, which means it will just execute the method but without going into it. Now if you have a breakpoint in the subroutine or the method, then it will still stop at that point. But if you don't, then it will just go ahead and step over. So we'll step over here, we check the request, it is actually 1, so we know that we will get to this method here. With this one, you don't want to step into because we don't have the actual source code to get into, find view by ID and stuff like that. So definitely just do a step over in this case. And at this point we can do the resume, execute at full speed again, and you can see the text here is now reflecting what the sub-activity is reflecting. So, are there any questions about this? No questions? All right. Is it easier or harder than the App Inventor way of doing things?
Way easier.
Well, it gives you a lot of flexibility. If you look up what kind of thing you can pass, you can actually pass multiple things with intent, because intent is a table. It's kind of like a mapping. You can use a key to map to a value, use another key to map to another value. So you can actually simultaneously pass multiple results back from one activity to the other activity, which is much more flexible than the way that App Inventor works, because App Inventor has a problem. You have to use a list to encapsulate, multiple things to make it look like one thing when you're passing from one activity to the next. This one has the ability to do it. You can pass any number of results back or parameters to the subactivity. Any questions about that part? Yep.
Try stripping out get intent with the saved bundle or a saved
Bundle.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It should do the same thing. Oh no, in
In the
subactivity. Yeah, get intent with saved instant state. Try swapping that out.
Like that.
Yeah.
Okay, it's complaining that it does not have a get extras because that is not a bundle method.
Well, get returns. It is a returns bundle. Right. Yeah.
Did I mistype something? Nope, I did not mistype anything. It doesn't have get extras.
So I'm looking right here. Public bundle get extras.
Okay, let's try it. Nope, does not have it.
That with an S.
Does not have it.
Weird. That's bundle. Should also be that bundle too.
And I did not mistype saved instance state either. But if you go the other way, which is get intent, it works out. This is because this is an intent, not a bundle. An intent has a bundle inside it, but it's not a bundle. I'll show you exactly what I mean by that. So if you look up the class intent, it has a bundle as a part of it to store the extra stuff. So that's why we need to, so when you use get intent, you have to get the extra one, which is get extras. There's a way to get to the extras directly, which is get string extra, and that will automatically go to the extra portion to retrieve the string. So you can shorten the other part a little bit. In other words, if we go back to here, these two calls or these two methods can be combined into one, into get string extra, which combines the two. But we cannot use the bundle here because this method only applies to intents, but not with bundles. Because a bundle is inside an intent, and that's why when you get an intent, you can use get string extra or get extras, and then you can get string to get to the parameter. And the bundle is not intended for passing parameters. I think it is intended for some other purposes. So, are there any other questions? No other questions? All right. That's it. Well, that's it for today's lecture. I don't have any particular homework assignments right now, but you might want to kind of look into these examples and.
Can you put your code up or something so I can take a look at it some more?
Yep. Well, first of all, I have to fix my notes, to reflect, the corrections that I made here, and then I can put the file up. So let me save. Make sure I save everything first. Disconnect and stop the recorder.